If you'll bear with us just a couple of minutes, we're waiting for our one more board member to join us so that we have quorum and we can call the meeting to order. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for your patience. We will call to order our MAPS for Citizens Advisory Board meeting for December 12th, 2023. Moving to item 2A, approve minutes of the November 2nd, 2023 MAPS Citizens Advisory Board meeting. They were included in the packet that was sent out to you. If anybody has any changes or modifications, okay. If not, I would take a motion in a second. Please cast your votes. The motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item 2B, receive the MAPS 4 monthly financial report ending October 31st, 2023.
Madam Chair, the financials on the revenue side for the month, $12,612,399. Fiscal year, $61,572,170. And for total on revenues, $451,777,587. I want to point out that we remain 2.6% above projections, and that is based on the new projections.
Oh, great.
On the expenditure side, for the month, $4,126,259. Fiscal year of $18,617,818, and a total of $186,747,732. I'll try to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay. Any questions of the financial report? Okay. If not, I would take a motion in a second to receive those. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item 2C, recommend approval of change order number 3 for the MAPS 4 Downtown Arena Phase 1A elevator modernization, an increase of $10,052.05, accept the project and placing the maintenance bond in effect.
So this first one is a final acceptance and a little change order to follow up, but it's final acceptance of the elevators. Kevin Cook is here from Populous to show you the changes that have happened. He's going to talk about items C, D, and E on your agenda.
Okay, welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me again. It's good to see everyone. So yeah, here we are, really close to the end for the Paycom Center scope of work that we've had going on. If you remember, we had an elevator project, a scoreboard project, and then 2 seating, the fixed seating and the retractable seating. And so it's really good to be able to close out the elevators and the scoreboard, hopefully today, and then come back to you in the early parts of next year to wrap up the seating. In general, most of the work is done there. We're just tying up little bits and pieces and loose ends and things. So as far as the elevators go, if you may remember, there were 4 passenger elevators as part of this modernization process. These were old elevators, original elevators that were constantly breaking down and having maintenance work done on them all the time. The motors and the components and everything inside them were really at the end of life. So the scope of work here was to replace all of that equipment, the motors, the electrical, the controls, all of that, the stuff that's inside the hoistway, and really gut that out and put in brand new so that these things can operate like new machines, but still keep the existing cab and just update the finishes inside those. So what you see here on the screen is passenger elevators 1 and 2 on the left and 3 and 4 on the right. And a couple things to point out is there are new call buttons to get the elevators to come to you, and then at the top there's new lights at the top to express where the elevator is when it's traveling towards you. Inside the elevator, there's new finishes. You can see here we have new buttons and indicator lights on the side, new panels on the side, new LED lighting and stainless steel ceiling, new tile floors, and then a hard durable shell panels along the sides that can be used as they're shown here. Or if you look at the next image here, you know, they've already started to wrap these panels with sponsorships and other advertisements, so it can be used either way. So all elevators 1 through 4 basically have the exact same finishes, very standard durable finishes. The doors were remaining, those stayed, but everything else inside is brand new. As we were going along on this project, we had a change order a few months back to also update the interior finishes for the service elevator and the freight elevator. This was to use a little bit of the extra money we had. And so on these 2 elevators, the components were newer. They weren't breaking down and having problems like the passenger elevators were. So really all this was a cosmetic update inside. As you'd expect, service and freight elevators take a lot of abuse, a lot of carts and dollies and things moving up and down inside these things. So it was just an update of some finishes that were pretty well damaged and ready to be replaced. So as you see here, it's basically the same finishes as the passenger elevators as far as the ceiling goes, with metal panel and LED lighting. and then a more standard stainless steel finish wall panel system and a diamond plate floor and lower wall base just for that extra durability. So any questions on the elevators before I move on to the scoreboard, and then I'll hit the change order at the end.
Okay, thank you.
So as far as the scoreboard project goes, obviously the biggest component of that project was a new center hung scoreboard, which I assume most of you've seen, maybe in person, but on TV or other things. This was the biggest element in the space, and so as you kind of look at the scoreboard, there's two components. You'll see in the top right, there's an upper ring video board, which is outset, and then the main video board is a little bit recessed and inside. And what that does is that allows that lower half to actually retract up into the space. So the steel structure above actually has a recess in the steel so that you can actually retract that thing all the way up in there, and so it can be clear when there's an event that doesn't use the actual center hung scoreboard. The outside ring also moves up and down, but it does not go up into the steel. It basically stops, and you can see a couple of speakers on the side there that hang down, and that's kind of the limit of how far it can move up and down. These are a couple of pictures that were interesting. So the scoreboard has been hung and kind of working now for a few months, but as we were going through it, you have to check each LED diode on each of the panels to make sure they're all on and working. And so the way they do that, they actually turn the scoreboard all one color, and then you can see some dots that are on or off. And then if you turn it to white, you can see different dots, and if you turn it to green. And so that's what these images show, is different colors as they were testing the scoreboard out and looking for pieces that needed replaced or weren't quite turning on to its fullest extent. So that was a really interesting process, but it took weeks and weeks to do it because there's millions of lights on this scoreboard. On the underside, there's the Paycom Center. That's the underside, underbelly vinyl graphic that can be removed and opened up so they can get inside the space. And you see the center circle in the middle of that, which shows where the camera is when there's a tip-off in the middle of the court. And then the underside video board is also really important. It's another feature that's been added here that allows people on the lower seats, so they're not looking straight up at the scoreboard. They actually can see the underside screens and get to visualize what's on the main scoreboard. In addition to that, there's lighting, speakers, and other things you can kind of see wrapped around that bottom edge. So looking at this overall view, the scoreboard wasn't the only thing that was replaced in the building. So on the left image, in the very top right, you get a glimpse of a scoreboard that's hanging at each end. Those are from the existing scoreboard. So we're able to replace and reuse some of the components of the old video board and put those in new spots for the facility to use. In addition to that, there were ADA spaces. You see the images on the right. The OKC ribbon board at the top, those were existing video boards that were there today, but we replaced with brand new video boards, as well as boards over the vomitory corners shown in that picture. So in general, the whole components of all of this were put in place. It's been a few months now that they've been able to use them during the games, and we've heard a lot of really, really good feedback on it. Obviously, the board is much larger than the old one, and has drawn a lot of really good attention, and people, from what I've heard, are very happy with it. So a quick update on the fixed seating and the retractable seating. So those two components, as you know, they're having events in the building already. So the seating is pretty much done, but there's been little minor adjustments and things that have still been being worked on. So for the fixed seating, we had to finish the lounge seats and a few other areas that were just getting tweaked, and some pieces that were broken or not installed quite right. So those last remaining punch items are pretty much complete, and there's one or two very minor things that need to be wrapped up, and then we should be able to bring that to you guys for final acceptance. The retractable seating was the last thing that was installed. The last section got put in about 2 days before the first week of basketball in October. There's been some railings and some other attic stock items that we've had to replace and are still on order, still some stuff that's being back ordered and reshipping, hopefully here yet at the end of the year, but first part of next year if we needed. But again, the system's working, it's doing what it needs to do for day-to-day use. We just need to get some of these little loose ends buttoned up and finished before we can take it to final acceptance for you guys. Any questions on that? I'll jump to the Okay, so the first change order is associated with the elevators. It's a change order for $10,000 or $10,052.05, and it's associated with an extension of time with this project. What really happened is the project was hoping to start in April, but when the Thunder made the playoffs and got the opportunity to play in the play-in game, that delayed us really getting going, based off of what was the last home game on the schedule. So we delayed it a couple of weeks there, and then when we had the change order for the freight and service elevator, when that additional scope was added, Kone said they were hoping they could maybe get it done in the same time frame, but they said they may need a week or two extra based off of that added work. So we just kind of let it play out and pushed as hard as we could to get to that point. But in the end, they basically needed an additional month of time, and so this was a change order for 33 calendar days and the $10,000. So with this change order, it's an increase of 0.42% over the original contract amount, and change orders 1 through 3 is totals up to $208,000, which is just about an increase of 8.68% over the original contract amount.
Okay.
And I can do the next one. Is that how we want to do it? Okay, let's keep going then. The second change order here is associated with the retractable seating. This is change order number 4. It's $107,296. And there's just a couple of miscellaneous items that were associated with this change order. So change order, item 1 is 5 custom media tables and storage carts for $25,000. Within the original package, there's media tables throughout the arena that were being replaced. These are the areas where I showed the video boards were being replaced right in front of them in some sections, along with the scores table and other things along there. So the NBA requires those tables to be taller than a normal folding table, as you would say, which is what they've been using. So we're upgrading those tables to meet the NBA requirements, and we needed to get 5 additional tables and carts. Item 2 is folding chairs. These are 45 new 26-inch tall folding chairs. These go at those media tables, so these are custom-made taller tables that can sit at the chairs that can sit at the taller tables. So it kind of goes hand in hand with the media table item here, and that's $24,000. And the third item are new end rails. There's 157 new 36-inch tall end rails. These are the rails that would run along the ends of some of the sections in the corners. We had some taller rails that were initially used in those areas, but when the court finally got put in place and we could sit and see where things were, some of those were creating kind of a side view sightline issue. I mean, you could still see the court in front of you. They weren't directly in front of you, but they were there on the side, and we decided it really wasn't best, so we looked to lower those railings. They're still within code requirements and meet all of that safety expectations, but it's a change to drop them down to provide a better experience for those people with those seats. And that's $57,000. So with change orders 1 through 4 here, a part of the retractables orders, that totals $577,000, which represents an increase of 9.92%. So really getting close to our threshold there, but we're still within that. And this change order here is about 1.84% over the original amount.
Okay,
Any
great.
questions on all those items?
Yes. Any questions about items 2C, D, or E?
Can I just ask, just going back to the media table, for example, and you mentioned it's an NBA standard, like it's a requirement. How frequently do we know the frequency with which the NBA, when it comes to just as that particular request as an example, how frequently do those requests come, those shifts in? Here's what our requirement was at this time, but now we're doing something different.
So I don't know exactly, but I know the NBA updates their entire set of guidelines every couple of years. So
Literally every couple.
I would say every 2 to 4 years there's a range. I know we were working off an older standard of like 2019 on some of our previous work, and I know they've updated it since then. So this is now based off of the latest NBA
Kevin,
guidelines.
that's an update. That's not a complete redo. I mean, There's just
They
a few little
update it,
changes.
so yeah, it's they go through what they have, they make changes based off of technology. A lot of times it's really on their camera, TV camera, and that kind of stuff usually is where a lot of changes come from. But yeah, they have strict guidelines. All the sports, major sports do actually, but you know, I wouldn't expect that to come along. And to be honest, they'd been letting the Thunder use what they'd had based off of grandfathering them in. They don't just make you change it immediately, but when you start making
Right.
changes, then they'd like you to try to update it.
Yeah, that was going to be my question is, once we started making changes, then we were expected to get up to what the current requirements are?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
as best you can.
Yeah,
And I
makes
think
sense.
there's some negotiability to some of that with them, but, you know, we can make this change and move forward.
We're probably asking you about contract terms that you don't know about. So we're, thank you for accommodating
It's a
our
good question.
questions. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So item 2C, recommend approval of the change order of $10,000. Take a motion in a second. Please cast your votes. The motion passes. Moving on to item 2D, the final acceptance for the scoreboard replacement. Take a motion in a second. The motion passes. Thank you. And finally, moving on to item 2E, recommend approval of the change order for the retractable seating. Okay, that motion passes too. Thank you very much, and thank you for that presentation. Moving on to item 2F, recommend approval of the memorandum of understanding between the City of Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority, and the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services for the MAPS 4 Mental Health Crisis Center #1 operating partner.
So items F and G are mental health related, and I've asked AJ Kirkpatrick to present the details on this. AJ's with ADG, and obviously they're our partner on this. So AJ's got some information.
Thank you, David. So we have 3 different items that we need to present today. As a part of this item, I'm going to give you a presentation on a discussion that we've been having with the selected operator for Crisis Center #1. To be clear, you would be able to vote on accepting the MOU that would officially recognize them as the operator moving forward for Crisis Center #1. The discussion in the presentation, we are not going to ask you to take a vote on because it did not appear as an agenda item. So it will come back to you in January, so you can take an official action on what I'm going to walk you through. So the third item today is I'm going to walk you through again. Probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I walked you through several operator RFQs that we went through. We have another one of those later in the agenda, so keep that in mind that the operators that we're going to discuss first went through that same process. So for Crisis Center #1, we went through a process. We had some members of this committee that were, or the subcommittee that were part of that selection process. And they selected the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. So we have been meeting with them fairly regularly throughout the past year, talking to them, and we have even gotten to the point that we are starting to talk about some of the pre-programming, I would basically say, on what the Crisis Center could include in terms of spaces. So to remind you, this is the full schedule that the Community Subcommittee was overseeing. Specifically, Crisis Center #1 and #2 are down there at the bottom. We are running a little behind on these compared to the schedule in the I-Plan, and that is in part because we were trying to be very cautious We knew that the Griffin Memorial Hospital move was pending, and we wanted to understand when that would be official and where that would be located. If you're not familiar with that news, it's going to be located at Portland and Reno, just west of downtown. And we also were to some degree trying to track the discussions about where the jail may relocate. As you probably are aware from news even through this week, that is still somewhat of a moving target. And the more we discussed it with the preferred operators, I think we kind of came to the conclusion that we didn't necessarily need to co-locate with the jail or totally understand where it was going to be before we started to work on these further. This is the full budget that was given in the original, the updated budget from what was in the I-plan, so the updated I-plan. This specific project it would include $44 million for the 4 mental health and addiction projects. That would be about 27% of the total budget for the community subcommittee. And this is the more important part. So we on each of the projects, you'll remember we broke them down by those different categories at the top. Down at the bottom, it's kind of hard without a pointer to direct you where I'm saying, but if you look at that bottom table, we did include about $3.8 million for construction centers for a total of $7.6 million. And we included in land acquisition just under $1.8 million for both, or that broke out to just under $900,000 for each. And that's going to be an important point that I get to here. So you may remember this slide from back in May of 2021. Things we wanted, this was a slide that we had presented to help you understand the general scope of what we were going to be working towards. A couple of things that I want to mention on here is at the time that the council was basically pitched the ideas about mental health and all the other maps for ideas, there was something in place that limited crisis facilities like this to just 16 beds. And what has happened since MAPS passed is that limit is no longer in place because we requested as a state a waiver of the IMD. Also, you may remember from that previous slide that we only have about $3.8 million per crisis center. And at the time that OKIC, which is, if you look at that gray photo, OKIC is on General Pershing behind the North Care facility. So it's the pink building behind the yellow building on that gray photo. And the proponents of these projects did say during those initial council meetings they wanted to recreate OKIC with the crisis centers. So that OKIC was finished in 2013, it was $5.8 million. $0.8 million for the crisis centers. That has since increased. In 2021, we were estimating that OKIC would cost about $7.4 million. So we have about half that based on the 2021 number. So there are a couple of things, there are 3 things we wanted to highlight that have changed the conversation on these projects. One is the IMD waiver that I mentioned earlier. So we are no longer capped to just 16 beds per. Second is the relocation of Griffin. In a lot of the discussion at the onset of MAPS 4, there was a desire to overall increase the total number of beds in our community for those facing mental health issues. We do understand from the current scope of the new hospital that it will itself be increasing beds pretty considerably. So that is a positive thing. And the third thing is that, and we don't need to really belabor this graph, but this graph is showing you construction costs and the increases. And you can see with this highlight, really since COVID and the impacts of the pandemic on construction costs, we're seeing increased construction costs across the board. So what we are initially proposing today, and this is fully supported by the Department of Mental Health, is they would like us to combine the two crisis centers into a single facility. That would allow us to double the budget that we have, the 3.8, back to the 7.6 million as a starting point for that project. That would create several efficiencies that it would reduce the overall staffing needs. In the conversations with both the operators, it has come up that between the addition of these projects, at least in the short term, we should expect that we may have a staffing problem. We're going to be adding a lot of new jobs in a field that we haven't. These are good growing pains, I think, and hopefully over time that those will level off. But there could be some initial staffing shortages there. Implication of space. So if we end up building two crisis centers, you're going to end up having additional staff, and you're going to have additional admin space to support that staff. So it does allow us to put more money into the beds, which we believe is the most important thing that we're trying to achieve here. And it also potentially would save us at least $800,000 in the land acquisition could be put back into the program. The way that is that we would probably end up having two separate wings on the same facility, two separate crisis stabilization, in addition to what's called the URC, the Urgent Recovery Center. So it basically would have 3 units. The URC is the facility for those that are usually in the first 24, not usually, within the first 24 hours. So it's a place to basically triage and to help to settle that person, to get them back on their medication, and then eventually they would be moved into one of the 2 crisis stabilization wings in the combined facility. So we had told the Department of Mental Health that we would come and make this initial proposal. We have also been in conversations with them about some ongoing hopes for them helping us acquire land. It's a little premature to start getting into site selection conversations. We're planning to do that next year. But there is some hope that they may be able to assist us with land that would mean that we could take the other $800,000, $900,000 for the other crisis center land acquisition and include that in our budget as well. So that's the overall pitch. Again, you can't take action on the actual question of combining the facilities, but it is something we wanted to go ahead and get in front of you, and happy to answer any questions about that.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay. Oh.
So I know we don't know land yet. I'm just trying to process what this is proposing. So voters, right, approved 2 crisis centers. So that's my first, we need to be very, very clear. Like, they approved 2. And I understand everything you're saying. I am listening. I want that very, very clear. I do not need someone to explain to me again what you just said. So that's very important. Voters approved 2. So I do not know how we get to a place, even with the explanation you just described to us, where 1 is okay. 621 square miles, I don't need to remind you all of that, but I will do that. I mean, I just think we're gonna have to really take our time on this, and I'd like to hear from some mental health professionals. The group I'm thinking of, just literally off the top of my head, might be, for instance, the police reform work. There's a group like a mental health crisis group that Mayor Holt helped put together. Y'all might recall.
Okay. The task force.
And there's very specifically mental health professionals. I think from North Care. I know my dean at OCU is on there. It might be worth hearing from them about why and if this approach is the right one, rather than this just being, our opinion. And I just stress this because as I'm listening to you talk right now, I'm just remember going on police ride-alongs, and I think there are a lot of people in our city who don't even realize they have a mental health condition. They just exist and behave. And they don't know that that is maybe some of those behaviors that they have taken to be as normal, or their family members have taken to be as normal, that might be bipolar, or, you know, all this sort of stuff. And so I really worry when we have 621 square miles of a city, what happens when we only build one of these facilities? Where does it go? How do people access it? How do we ensure that accessibility?
Well,
Okay, that's just the.
And just to be clear, today, we're not considering that.
Yes,
So I think you're right. There is a lot more that both the subcommittee and this board and council need to understand and have input from and experts.
Yeah,
And have that expertise. Today, we're looking at the entering into the MOUs with Department of Mental Health.
Sure.
So, but you raised some good points, and all of that needs to be thought through before we make that decision.
Yeah, and Councilmember, I did my ride-along on Friday night from 4 p.m. till 2 in the morning with the police. And so I was peppering them with questions along these same lines. We spent the last few months getting to know as many people as we can in the mental health field. Every chance I get, I am asking them the same question: where would you put these facilities? A couple of things I want to make clear. You know, we do have OKIC. In addition to the crisis center, we also have the restoration center coming. So there really would be the potential for 3 facilities when we're finished. And, you know, I've gone back and watched those, specifically the council presentation on these, probably about 4 or 5 times. And I really have tried to focus on what it was that people thought they were getting out of the proposal, not knowing that 16-bed limit. Was it about the number of beds? Was it about geographic dispersion? Your questions about the police get back to one of the things we've heard from a gentleman that was involved with the Barrett County Restoration Facility is really they do need to see the police as one of our primary clients. And so we have been trying to engage with, even through this week, with them about data on where their calls are coming from, because we want to make these as convenient as possible to those officers. And that ride-along really drove home to me that we've got 12 subdivisions, and we need to be really thoughtful about making sure that these facilities are as convenient for all 12 subdivisions. So the conversations are ongoing, and I think we'll dig into site selection more in 2024.
Yeah, that's all things that we'll bring you whenever we actually bring an item to this group and ultimately to council for combining them, so.
Yes, Bob?
I do want to address, I understand today our limited action would be to look at the MOU and whether we approve that with ODMH. Is there anything in the MOU? It's very long, and I have to confess I haven't read every word of it. Assume that city staff and council have crafted it in a way that's consistent with what we've done in the past. So I didn't go through line by line to understand it. Is there anything in there that would commit us to some of the issues you're talking about today, about a single facility or anything like that? Or is this broad enough, just getting them as the operating partner?
No, we really wanted to make it official with them so we can continue on. The thing that really is probably the most driving factor and why we needed to get this issue in front of you is we have gone through architecture selection. We have a preferred architect, and at some point we need to start negotiating with them on what it is that they're actually designing, if it's a single crisis center number 1 as originally envisioned, or if it's a combined crisis center.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't unwittingly committing ourselves to
Right.
a particular course of action just by the way the MOU is structured.
And I'll say again, the Department of Mental Health has been supportive of what we're saying today.
But no, this does not.
Right.
This does not tie us one
To
way or
one
the
or
other.
two.
Yeah, they are going to operate a crisis center.
So I guess my I think there are 3 requests I would have at this point as we move forward into these discussions and the process. Number 1, I think it is imperative that the group that exists in terms of the mental health professionals who are working with Assistant City Manager Fairbrush and Andrea, I think bringing them to the table would be very, very useful because they're mental health professionals in our own city who are helping us think through that. So that would just be, in my mind, incredibly valuable for the subcommittee and for us, and then ultimately council. The second thing is related to their work, right? And I was just listening to you, AJ, like you made me think about this. So it's not just the police ride-alongs and their crisis intervention team folk, but remember, I believe heading into 2024, the city is, we've already put out a request for proposals for the alternative response to mental health calls. And so some operators about to start responding differently, right? Instead of 911 sending always out police, someone else is going, the dispatcher will be sending out some other service provider, similar to the way our street outreach teams with homelessness now, it's the Mental Health Association of Oklahoma. So I think this work, it has to be very intentional about connecting with that work. Like who's bringing people to these beds, in other words, is something I think we've got to think about. And then the third part, and this is just what I have learned through being on that task force that the mayor created for law enforcement, de-escalation, and the Citizens Review Board. Cultural competency is going to be key to the success of this program. And what I, of course, mean by that is, and this goes to location, but also just the communities that are dispersed throughout this community. We know, and maybe this is old hat for many of you, but it was just something that got pressed upon me through that work. We know there is a long history for Black and brown people in this country where trust does not necessarily exist between mental health providers and those communities, and that's true for LGBTQ folk as well. And so that cultural competency, making sure that the service provider, and that does matter for what we're doing today, that service provider has staff, counselors, and I understand we have a counseling shortage, so it's not lost on me either, but those counselors need to have awareness of and oftentimes be from those communities. So as we move in this conversation about possibly going down to one, we need to be very intentional about who's doing that service, and that's where that location also becomes important. I guess I'd like to learn more about those three things. Where are we with cultural competency? And maybe that's to hear from Department of Mental Health Services. Bringing that task force to the table, and then again, thinking about how the street outreach team that's gonna come online from the city of OKC, what role they play in this work. Those are my three requests.
Okay,
Thank you.
you got it.
Okay. Great. Good input, good conversation. Other comments? Okay. So moving back to our item, 2F, recommend approval of the memorandum of understanding between the city, Public Works Authority, and the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health Services for operation of Mental Health Crisis Center number 1. Take a motion in a second. Oh, sorry, I'm getting there. Sorry. Motion passes, thank you. Moving on to item 2G, recommend approval of memorandum of understanding between the City of Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority, and North Oklahoma County Mental Health Center, DBA North Care.
So continuing on, AJ is going to give us a short synopsis of this contract also.
Right, so very similar to the previous action, we went through a selection process, and this presentation is for the next item. We don't have a presentation for this one. We went through a selection process, and we selected North Care, which is on General Pershing in their main campus, as the preferred operator for the Restoration Center. I do want to mention we do have Connie Schlittler from North Care in the audience with us today, and that is as short and sweet as I can make it.
Okay. Any questions about this MOU with North Care or for the operator of the Restoration Center?
So, again, I guess maybe it's heading into the council meeting that I'd like to hear a little bit more, but I just can't stress enough this cultural competency thing. This is not a checkbox. I've I have constituents and friends who, even once we connect them to mental health service providers, oftentimes, unfortunately, the service provider lacks that cultural competency, lacks an understanding of lived experience of people who come from traditionally marginalized communities. And so I'd like to better understand what NorthCare is doing specifically in that regard. That is so important, and our residents need to hear that. So I don't know if that's something we could hear today, but it definitely needs to be something that happens going into that council meeting.
Yeah, we don't have anybody here that can speak to that. I apologize for that, but I will certainly bring him to council.
Thank you so much.
Other comments or questions? Okay. If not, I would take a motion in a second. Cast your votes. Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, AJ. Are you also on H? Okay.
Yes.
So
Bring it on.
moving on
Bring
to
it on.
item 2H, recommend approval of request for proposals to be advertised for the MAPS 4 Transitional Housing Operating Partner.
As I mentioned, you likely remember these from a few months ago when we went through several to begin MAPS 4. We've entered into some of the later ones we need to get done here. The fourth piece of the mental health package was housing. And I'm going to say the word transitional housing, and I understand to some in the housing community that carries additional connotation. At the time that Commissioner Blumert initially proposed this idea to council, there was a thought that this housing would be for those transitioning out of the mental health facilities that we're building. But I'm going to talk about it a little bit here in a second about how I'm trying to kind of broaden that concept based on feedback we're hearing from potential applicants to this opportunity. So again, this is the overall schedule. This shows where the transitional housing piece falls in the overall schedule. In all of the projects, we use some of the same categories for activities. We had operator selection agreement, that gray bar. We had pre-design, the green bar, design and construction. So we're starting to straddle that green and gray area on this project. There have been architecture interviews for this and the Restoration Center, and that is due in part because we had a recommendation that comes up here later that we should try to co-locate this housing. So while we had the Restoration Center, asked architects to propose on both. So in terms of that gray bar, that falls into three steps: the advertisement, which is the approval of the RFP prior to release. That's what we're doing today. We will involve you in the selection, or be on that selection committee. And then once we have a preferred operator, we will do the approval of the binding term sheet. We often will call that the MOU. That's what you just did in the previous two actions. And as we're going further on into design and construction, we will bring forward a final agreement. The difference being that the MOU/binding term sheet tends to be a little more high level and is more about the rules of engagement between the city and the chosen operator. The approval of the final agreement tends to be much more in the weeds about the relationship that's going to exist into the future between the city and the operator as the tenant of the building. So I'll walk through that. The content, the notice to proposers, general requirements, the submittal requirements, how we're going to evaluate their proposal, an early indication of some of the general contract terms they should expect if they are chosen. And then finally, we talk to them about the actual process of proposal review, who's going to be included in that process. So as a reminder, the budget for this is now $7.8 million. In the resolution is housing for residents experiencing mental illness, experiencing homelessness, and transitioning out of a crisis center. Let me go back for a second to what I was saying earlier. the term transitional housing can be very specific in the housing world, and I don't think we totally appreciated that when we used that term in the I-Plan. So what we are doing to try to loosen that a little bit for the potential applicants is in that next section, how they would mix the units between short-term and long-term residents, if you could also have some potential for longer-term residents. The key point being that clause about transitioning out of a crisis center, that we need to make sure that they're still leaving space to allow for those that are leaving crisis stabilization without housing to have a place to land. So this, the city is soliciting proposals from qualified government agencies. That's another key point. Qualified government agencies capable of operating housing solutions for individuals living with or recovering from mental illness. We're asking them to assist in determining the appropriate composition of those housing units between short-term and longer stay residents. In addition, and the reason we're doing this now, the addition of the operating partner prior to design, is that we want to make sure that they have ample opportunity to have some input into the design. We said in the RFQ the same thing, that we wanted to make sure that we were co-locating this with one of the facilities. We made the decision early on that it made the most sense to co-locate with the Restoration Center because the Restoration Center to some degree was viewed as kind of the hub of the entire system. So it made sense to have them closer to where we would expect more people to be coming. We're looking for operating partner to provide recommendations regarding those adjacencies. To some degree, that is getting to like, what is the nature of adjacency mean, right? So we've gotten into some questions about, especially in the early conversations with NorthCare, that there may be some spaces that make more sense in the actual restoration building. There may be some things that may make sense to actually be in the housing portion of it, depending on how comfortable they're trying to make the folks that are going to be using those spaces. But the main point is that the hope that the co-location will foster synergy and collaboration between operators, programs, and services. So the operating partner will be responsible for all expenses associated with operation and maintenance and entitled to all revenue from their operations. And we do tell them that we're open to various development scenarios, including new construction, renovation of existing buildings, in addition to existing buildings. We pretty much assume this will be new construction, but again, it is open for their opportunity to propose on that. So the successful respondents to this should have relevant experience with similar facilities, be able to provide wraparound support services. That has been a very key point in all the discussion, either directly or through a subcontract partner agency. And they have to have the fiscal and service capacity to operate and manage the housing in this case. They should demonstrate that they operation service delivery experience with similar facilities, that this is not their first time, and the ability to work cooperatively with the city and the community. However, if they do not have direct experience, that third major bullet, they are allowed to make the case for what other experience they have that they think is relevant to their ability to operate this housing. We do welcome proposals from single providers or from multiple providers using a common legal entity. Per the council resolution, commencement of construction is conditional on the identification of operational funding from a non-municipal source. That's a very key point here. Commencement of construction conditional on identification of operational funding from a non-municipal source. Operator agreement with a government agency. Again, the government agency that includes measurable benchmarks, and this all needs to happen before December 31st, 2026. Where possible, the facility, in this case they use the word center, residents. So proposers are expected to recommend as part of their proposal a full set of benchmarks. This was a big discussion amongst the council at the time, especially on some of these social service projects. And the opportunity as part of the proposal to tell us the benchmarks they think they would be used to future agreement. Those are the additional RFP details. So these are all, these are the submittal requirements. These are all the things that we are asking them questions on. If you look through the document, some of those have as many as 7 or 8 sub-questions to them. They usually end up turning into 100 to 150 page proposal when they're done. But those are some of the things that we ask them to weigh in on. What are your qualifications? What are your financial capacities? We ask for a business plan that lays out the first few years. We ask that they have thought through risk management and quality assurance, those insurance. And those perfectly line up with the evaluation criteria. So these look very similar to the previous slide, but these are the things that we then grade them against when the selection committee do their proposal and potentially watching them present. So this lines up that we are considering this today, December 7th, and that first bullet, assuming it December 9th. Make a plug again to anybody that's watching. Time to start to tell your associates, those that you know in the work world, that this opportunity is coming for this housing. It's January 9th in the new year, where they can come and ask us any questions about expectations for this project or how they what information to include in the proposal. February 7th, then, will be the deadline for when we expect the proposals to be received, and that would give us February and part of March to consider those proposals, do interviews as required, and then go through the process of selecting the operating partner. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you, AJ. Any questions of AJ on the RFP proposal process?
Has the Restoration Center been cited yet?
No, we have certainly had conversations about potential sites, but we are collecting data to the council members' questions earlier. We sought out data from several different sources that we're going to be trying to dig into in the early part of 2024 that will help, I think, educate some of that discussion.
Thank you. And then in the pre-design slide, you had a abbreviation NTP. What does that stand for?
NTP?
That's notice to proceed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jessica, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Based on the minimum qualifications to qualify to bid for this, how many different agencies do we know of in the state would qualify for this?
I am aware of at least 2 that we think may be interested in this. I will add that those are nonprofits, and there is specific language about governmental agencies, so we assume that they may have to partner with someone that would meet that criteria.
Councilman?
It will be my broken record. I wish I had a better record for you. Is it possible in that contract or in the RFP to include that cultural competency language? And let me just briefly.
It's absolutely possible.
Wonderful. And to those of you who might be annoyed that I keep bringing that up, it's on my mind so heavily because yesterday we had the Sisu ribbon cutting. And that's where during one of the speeches at the ribbon cutting, they reminded us 40% of homelessness that's youth is LGBTQ. And so they had the ribbon cutting, but they're building transitional housing soon next to it. If we build something and that operator does not have that sort of expertise, then the mental health work can fall apart. That, you see what I mean? Like, it's just that important. So just wanted to, we'll get into a better record later. I'll bring some Pink Floyd for you or something. That's that.
It's an important component of success.
Yeah, good.
Bob?
I'm just curious. I'm not sure is my mic on.
You're on.
Okay. Like in most of these situations, the city will not fund the operations after the project is completed, and that's one of the items in the RFP is proposals as to how operations would be funded. Do you have any sense of how in this particular project, where those sources of revenue would be? I assume you're not asking those who are homeless to pay rent to a housing unit or to pay for psychiatric services if they're in a crisis center and then moving into housing. And if it's a not-for-profit or a government agency that's doing that, what are the revenue sources likely to be to fund operations?
I'll be honest that we have not had that level of conversation with the organizations that have shown early interest. So I don't want to say anything incorrect,
Okay.
but they do understand that that is going to be part of this.
Well, obviously, that's something that they'll have to propose and we'll have to consider as part of the review selection process. I didn't know if there was any sense of that ahead of time about that particular issue. Okay, thank you.
And that's where we lean into their expertise, and they get to show us their expertise. Okay. Any other comments or questions on this item? Okay. If not, I would take a motion in a second for item 2H. Please cast your votes. Thank you, AJ. Motion passes. Moving on to item 2I, recommend approval of final plans and specifications to be advertised for the MAPS 4 Park Enhancement, Public Space Transformation River Phase 1 Pedestrian Bridge.
We have one more presentation for you today.
This is,
Chris Russell with Team Engineers is here. This is the bridge that we've talked about, and he'll remind you that we've bought the beams already, and we're trying to fast track this to meet some timing expectations. So I'll turn it over to Chris so he can go through all that.
Chris, glad to have you back.
Oh, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. So, let's go ahead and get into it. Since I know this group has seen some of this before, but just to recap, we've got a location map just to kind of get ourselves oriented. The proposed project is shown in red. So the proposed bridge is just upstream of the eastern dam. On the north side of the river, it'll tie into the Greenway Trail. On the south side of the river, it'll tie within the Embark lease area that connects to the O'Connor site. As David mentioned, the MAPS program has already pre-purchased those beams earlier this year. Those beams have been fabricated and are waiting in storage for this project to kick off. Leading up to this point, there's a lot of coordination in terms of design. One of those things was the Embark boat landing project, which you can also see in this location map in blue on the south shore. We also coordinated with Oklahoma River Sport, specifically for the location of the piers in the water so that it wouldn't impact their rowing lanes. And then, of course, we've been in ongoing conversations with the O'Connor construction since they are actively constructing. So here we've got a plan and profile, or a top and a side view of the bridge. So just some general dimensions as a recap. The bridge is 20 foot wide, inside rail to inside rail. It's about 484 feet long across the river, and it's got about another 100 feet on either side of that to tie into the existing ground, the shoreline. The low beam elevation, like the bottom part of the bridge, is now set at 1178. Originally, we had it about a foot higher, but we currently have it lowered to this elevation so that the bridge connections to the shorelines, those ramps coming in, are ADA compliant. And I'll have a slide a little later showing you those more specifically. One last note on that. We did specifically check with Public Works that even their largest boats will have clearance at that elevation. So here we just have a couple typical sections showing just the proposed pavement. The top one is for the trail reconstruction on the Greenway Trail. This is matching the plans that built that trail network. The bottom one is same section of pavement, but this is covering everything outside the bridge. So here's that second plan and profile sheet, but like I said, this covers everything outside of the bridge deck. So on the left side of your screen, that's showing the connection to the O'Connor site on the south side of the river. You can see that we've got a series of 3 ramps and landings, and so that's where we have that ADA compliance tying into the proposed elevation of that O'Connor grading. On the north side of the river, we've the connection, the grade is quite flatter. It's just under 3.5% tying into the Greenway Trail. Here, this will be the last plan and profile I show you, but this is for the Greenway Trail reconstruction. You can see kind of in the middle of that sheet, we're proposing to raise the Greenway Trail about 1.5 feet to smooth out that connection. So by picking up the trail, makes it flatter connection to the bridge. But we do have shown 400 feet of trail reconstruction. That is, in essence, contingency. We're trying to grab a wider swath of additional quantity just in case it gets damaged or needs repair as the contractor's out there working, moving their equipment around. They've got quite large equipment. But the actual regrading is a much smaller extent, only about 200 feet or so. So some of the aesthetics with the base bid of the project, here you can see that conceptual rendering. We've got some of these base bid aesthetics included in cable railing, as well as with that railing, we'll have some lighted rail to shine down on the deck for safety. The pier medallion. So what that is, in that rendering, you can see underneath the bridge, those are the piers in the water. They run parallel with the river. So on either face of those piers will be the medallions that we're talking about. So they'll be sitting there. Then also with the base bid, we have some lighting underneath the bridge deck to shine down on those piers, making the bridge look like it's kind of floating on the water at night. Also included with the plans are some bid alternatives. So for some additional aesthetics, one of those would be the decorative panels that run along the side of the beams, run along the side of the bridge to cover up those beams. So that would have a pattern cut into it, and then some backlighting to shine through those holes. Also included with the plans is some ornamental light poles, as well as some banner arms. So as I mentioned, quite a bit of coordination went into design, but we've also been coordinating with several entities on permitting, specifically U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We submitted documents to them beginning in November, but we've been in talks with them for months, most of the year, in fact. So we've submitted those. They're moving along. We've also submitted for a building permit with the city. That's mainly to get the project an address and tie any other city permits to that, including the one that I've got shown there at the bottom, the Scenic River Overlay application. And then we've also submitted the conditional letter of map revision for the city's review. It's also called a CLOMR. Once the city reviews and approves that, we'll send it on to FEMA for their review and approval. So looking at the schedule, we are on track. After leaving here today, and with council approval, begin advertising on the 20th. With favorable bids coming in, I'll be back beginning of next year, January, February timeframe, to approve that low bidder. And then we're looking to provide notice to proceed to the contractor at the beginning of March. That's around the same time that we're anticipating the core approval of our permits. And that's what the contractor will need to begin. Then looking ahead, we're anticipating completion of construction by the end of 2024 in time for the Ocana opening at the beginning of 2025. So last slide I've got for the estimate. What's in these plans, so that's that base bid pedestrian bridge, is just over $6.8 million. The steel beams that were already awarded came in at just over $1 million, so that'll bring the total pedestrian bridge construction estimate to just under $8 million. So just for context, the program budget for this MAPS 4 River Enhancements project package does include this bridge, the low water dam, community gathering stage, and river beautification. So, and then the last couple things there are the estimates for the bid alternates I mentioned. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Russell?
When you're constructing or reconstructing the greenway, will there be a temporary path?
We do not have one planned right now because we don't know exactly how the contractor is going to, what path they'll need to get to the river. But we do have notes in the plans for construction signage so that it's clear both for the trail and for the river, people in the river, that not to go past certain points.
And then my second question is, will there be a trail from the south side of the bridge connecting back to the existing trail on the south side?
Not as part of this program or this construction package, but Ocana is, I believe part of Ocana's agreement is to build that connection, covering the South River bank.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? I know this is a little early, but I was looking at that rendering of the bridge with the decorative panels, and we were discussing that really is, that bridge is going to be a gateway from Ocana to the Bricktown area and the Bricktown area to what what those designs are. So
Absolutely.
that it feels like a pathway both ways.
Absolutely.
So I know, like I said, that's a ways off, but, okay, so on item 2I, I would take a motion in a second to recommend approval. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Thank you. Item 2J has been stricken. The item was not ready for presentation, so that will be on a later meeting. That's moving us on to item 2K, recommend approval of engineering services contract with Garver for the MAPS 4 sidewalks and related amenities, Phase 2A and 2B, for a fee of $728,000.
So this continues on with our sidewalk work, continuing on with the preferred pedestrian areas that is in Bike Walk OKC, and we're just anxious to get some more sidewalks out there. Remember, we've got one contract out there with 2 phases, and that's real close to coming out for bids. So right after the first year, we'll have our first sidewalk package. And then this one will take, I don't know, 6 months or so to get a second package out.
Okay? Any
But
questions?
this went, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
this went through the usual process that you're used to seeing for selection of engineers.
And I might add that it was 100% supported by the subcommittee.
Great, thank you for that. Any questions or comments?
Maybe I'm on K. Whenever I clicked on it was like the presentation part, it brings up the presentation from the river. Did y'all notice that?
I didn't click on it.
Just
So is there,
There's no
there's not,
presentation.
no presentation
Okay.
for this?
And then my only request, as I don't know if this is the right time to bring it up, but I'm going to do it. I know we had spoke both during council and subsequently that as it relates to the sidewalks, I was very interested in what it would look like to have with the MAPS 4 sidewalks, just some, I don't know, paneling or something. I know you talked about this was something you all were thinking about, but something that lets people know that these sidewalks are in fact MAPS 4 sidewalks.
Right, so we are looking at that, but the sidewalks is gonna be difficult because this contract in particular, it's a lot of infill. So it might be 20 feet, it might be 40 feet of sidewalk connecting other sidewalks. And those medallions, Todd, what are they costing us now? Huh? $100 a piece. So we're reserving those for some of the bigger projects. It's drop them on every little piece of sidewalk. Doesn't seem cost effective.
Right.
But we are putting them on the bus stop pads and all of our buildings. If we get a long stretch, Councilman, that half a mile or so of sidewalk that we do,
That's
we can
appropriate.
drop one in there, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking, I'm sorry, but I'm in my head, we're thinking about some sort of a stamp also, that,
Yeah.
almost like
I
a
like that.
brand that we can push into the concrete.
That would be better.
No, yes. What it is, like, so yeah, on the bigger ones, longer ones, yes, do that, or the first item, or the $100 thing.
The medallions.
Yeah, but yes, that stamp, right, even in the repair work, I think will just go such a long way. So just so long as that happens, I'm good.
Sure.
That's reminiscent of WPA was
That's
always
literally what I am thinking.
put into their projects.
That's
It still
exactly what
reminds
I
us
meant.
today that
Right.
that was a WPA project.
Yeah, my
Absolutely.
great-grandchildren will be able to see that it was a MAPS 4 project.
There you go. All right, great point. Any other comments? Okay, not, I would take a motion in a second. Please cast your votes. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, discussion items. Do we have anything?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Item 4, Citizens Advisories Subcommittee reports. Anything? Anything from the subcommittees? Jessica?
We did have a presentation, initial presentation on the animal shelter and what that looks like. So it is very exciting to see some of the work coming along on that. I know it wasn't on this Citizens Advisory Board meeting, but if you do get a chance, it's outstanding what they're doing to improve that facility. And it's been under some pretty substantial logistic situations to make that happen. So I appreciate the architects and what they did to bring that to us on Tuesday.
Great, thank you for that. And I would just report from the innovation that we saw a presentation yesterday of initial designs for the Henrietta B. Foster Center, and it looks really great. Have toured that facility and was very curious how architects were going to be able to make that a really exciting and just a space with a lot of energy, and I think they accomplished that. So really excited to see that project moving forward, as well as a presentation on Innovation Hall and how the entire district is developing. So those projects are moving along as well. Anything else?
I'd like to add that the contract with Garver will provide almost 13 miles of new sidewalks. Pretty excited about that. And also, I've had the opportunity to ride the new rapid bus transit system along with several other members of the committee, and it's a fantastic opportunity for Oklahoma City.
Great. I've seen them, so we'll need to take a ride. Okay, moving on to item 5, update status on the MAPS 4 program.
A couple of things. The Coliseum is going very well out at the fairgrounds. They've they've completed some of the third level concrete pours, and it's going great. It's on time. Then I'd also like to add that you're all invited to the MAPS 3 Wellness Center ribbon cutting this afternoon at 2 o'clock. You can fit that in your schedule. We're very happy to get that third one online. That's all I have.
Okay, great. Yeah, and the address, David?
I'm sorry, it's at Northeast 36th and Lincoln,
Okay,
right by Homeland.
right. Outstanding. Okay, moving on to item 6, comments by board, staff, citizens. Do we have any citizens signed up to speak? No? Anything from the staff? Okay, any comments from the board?
Just wish everybody happy holidays. Looking forward to 2024.
Absolutely.
We're on the move.
And if you believe the early forecast, bundle up.
No.
And maybe get your snowshoes on.
No.
Okay.
Can I just ask something real quick, please?
Sure.
AJ, thank you for the work you're doing. I think it's important. I know as a council person, one of the most frustrating things in the whole world to me is when I receive a text message or an email from someone on a project I'm working on, and they don't begin with, thank you for getting the BRT launched. Thank you to Embark staff for getting the BRT launched. Why? Look at the great work you're already doing. Now I would like to add some suggestions. It almost never begins like that. It's usually like a text. It's like, hey, did you know that this sucks and here's what you can do? And it's like, oh my, thanks for your help, you know? So it's important for me to communicate that back to you. I appreciate the work you're doing. It's important, the work you're doing. You know that's important. So when you hear my suggestions, it's just, I want us to make sure, kind of to your point of the WPA, it's something that generations from now we're proud of, so.
100% agree. Thank you. Okay, any other comments? Okay. Wish everybody well and a beautiful end to this year, and we will see you in 2024. I can't believe those words. We are adjourned.